really excited about this new session. We're going to be doing scenario gaming. So it's new to this year's Climate Summit. I'm pretty excited. I want to introduce Elsbeth Magilton. She's an attorney and professor serving as the Director of Externships and the Executive Director of the Space, Cyber, and Telecommunications Law programs at the University of Nebraska College of Law. She's also a current Scowcroft National Security Fellow at the Eisenhower Center for Space and Defense at the U.S. Air Force Academy. Her work is focused on space law, technology, and national security, and on making education practical, experiential, and fun. Relevant to our session today, she develops simulations that draw from traditional teaching methods to speculative fiction, and working with groups to predict behavior and solve problems. So I'll just pass it off.
Okay, thank you. I'm good. That was too easy. It never just turns on when you turn it on. Hi, I am so excited to be here today to do some gaming with all of you and maybe think about the world in a little bit of a different way as we do some scenario gaming. Now, you might have noticed on the agenda when you looked at it, I'm a law professor. And I assure you, we have people at the law school who actually work in environmental law, agricultural law, and other areas that you might more immediately associate with climate. I am none of those people. You have the space and tech person here, and in some ways that makes sense. Some of my work does intersect with climate issues in remote sensing satellites, so the satellites that we use to look at the Earth, to track some of those changes in meteorology and how we license those things. But I think I'm really here today to do some of my other work. So I wanted to introduce myself very, very briefly. 11 at Nebraska. I started with a typo. Look at me, so relatable. So I've been at Nebraska Law for 11 years. I work in the space tech and research industry, which I've already kind of alluded to a little bit. But what that means is that I look at the laws and regulations that touch things that leave Earth to go to space, so launches, and things that are in space and operating in space, so different types of satellites and communications issues. Personally, I'm a gamer, I'm a reader, mom, Girl Scout troop leader. I just rotated off my position as Girls Code Lincoln president. I sit on an observatory board, and I share those things with you because I think it tells you a lot about what I'm interested in and kind of what we're going to start to get to today a little bit, which is public education, very practical education. And I'm also really interested in people who are curious. Right? Curious about the world, curious about problem solving, and approach the world with curiosity. So I run simulations like the one you're going to be doing today, and I'll drop in an asterisk here. This is not improv, this is not any of that. So if anyone's feeling nervous, like, oh, collaborative gaming exercise, like you're not gonna have to get up in front of the room and do anything, right? This is discussion focused. This is thinking through problems collaboratively with others, but there's no putting you on the spot, making you pretend to be anybody else or anything like that. So you can breathe easy. This work grew out of developing teaching tools in law school, as well as a thing that we call wargaming. And some of you might kind of be familiar with that phrase. There's a great movie about it from the 80s if you want to look that up. Wargaming are the kind of simulations and exercises the Department of Defense and other government groups or any other type of group might run to help them assess a situation and think about how they would make decisions in that situation, right? How would this work in practice? So you can imagine a lot of contexts, particularly that the Department of Defense would like to do this in. And that's where a lot of my work at least started. I think a lot about words like deterrence and assurance. So deterrence being, how do we deter other countries from doing things we don't want them to do? How do we assure people that we are allied with and others of our behavior? How do we make our behavior predictable and predict the behavior of others? These simulations are also a really interesting place to facilitate difficult topics. And when I say difficult, that can mean political difficult, but it can also just mean problems that don't have easy solutions, right? Where there isn't going to be a magic outcome, right? A climate problem, right? There isn't one simple answer to solve all of these issues. There are so many thoughts, different opinions, variables, countries, places, people, all the things, right? It's a really difficult, thorny challenge that's never going to come wrapped in a bow. That's not how we solve it. So what I'm really interested in is, how do we influence behavior? How do we predict behavior? And how do we start unpacking what feels unpackable, right? And that's what these are about. In hypotheticals, right, meaning basically just a story, right? We're putting together a hypothetical fact pattern for you to look at, or how we teach law school, right? So I will hand my students this. I'll say client A walks into your office and this and this and this and this and this. Tell me what you're going to tell them, right? And there's positives and there's negatives and there's this and there's that. We do this in other forms of teaching too, right? If you're an engineering student, your engineering professor might hand you a test that says client so-and-so walks in and wants you to build XYZ on XYZ pieces of land. Will that work? Won't that work? Right? So we're kind of building off of those types of topics. And what is useful about doing hypotheticals is that we never give you the perfect client, right? You never get the perfect fact pattern. You got to figure out how to break bad news to them, what's going to be the best option to give them, those positives, those negatives, and how to do that. And that's a lot of what these kind of problems help us do when we're thinking about those thorny problems. So, a couple things I want to note about this exercise before we jump in. This is significantly abridged. Normally when I do an exercise like this, I like to have hours and hours, and we'd spend 20 to 30 minutes on every question I'm going to pose to you, and we simply don't have time to do that today. But we thought it would still be great to give you a taste of what this might look like, because it's something you can do to solve problems when you're thinking about it in class. It's a thing that you can do with groups that you're working with, student groups. You're also one of the larger groups I've ever done this with. We lost a bunch of the high schoolers, so you might now be giving the Water for Food conference might give a run for the money with this group of about 70-ish people. Normally I do this in a class of about 20. So we're gonna break you into really small groups, right? We have 10 facilitators in here that I'm gonna talk about here in a second that are gonna help guide this a little bit. The other thing I really like to make clear, there is no right answer. We're not gonna reconvene at the end of the hour and I'm gonna be like, and this is what happened, because there isn't that. Right? We don't always get that in the real world when we're solving real difficult challenges and thinking about relationships between different parties. So there is no solution, right? But that shouldn't be discouraging, because that means that if there isn't one solution, there might be hundreds, there might be thousands, right? But there's not going to be a pretty package at the end of this wrapped in a bow. It's fictional. Now, sometimes when I do these, particularly the Department of Defense, right, we use real countries and we talk about real variables, right? And that can be really useful when we're doing planning for real life situations. In this situation, I put you someplace fictional. It's not even on planet Earth anymore, right? And I do that very intentionally because it allows you to leave whatever biases, politics, opinions that you might have checked out on Earth, and you can look at this a little bit more objectively, right? I also ask you to take on a role that might not be the kind of role that you have here, right now, right? And that's why we're in a fictional narrative, right? We're gonna move to a different location so that you can look at it with clear, fresh, different eyes. When you're in your groups, you can feel free to get into character, but you don't have to. You can talk in third person. You can be like, this is what I think they would do. Again, we want you to be comfortable. I will tell you, most people think that they would never, ever get into character and like pretend to be the person almost every time. At least half of the room is like, no, this, and starts advocating. And it is definitely getting into character. So you might find that for yourself, you might not. And either way, you're golden. That's very good. If you are still completely unclear on what I'm talking about, that's fine. We're gonna walk you through it, we're gonna get through it, and we'll figure it out. Like I mentioned, there are people here who are gonna help you, who are gonna guide you. And they're around the room. If you put your hands up if you're a facilitator, you see them, they already even know what role they're playing, but they're not gonna tell you yet, right? So here in a minute, I'll have you break and probably just find the person closest to you. This doesn't have to be perfect. You don't have to be in super even groups. Just try and get in your groups. Online folks, I think we tried to find a way to get you the exercise. You can go into a breakout room so you can talk to each other as well. And yeah, let's just start breaking out, and then we'll move to the next step and we'll start handing out the scenario. So facilitators, if you could stand and maybe put your hands in the air again so that when everyone stands up, they can still see you. Move your chairs around. Find a facilitator near you. So I'm gonna read the exercise out loud to you. I know that maybe that's wild to be like, this person is gonna stand up there and read 2 pages of text to us. I will tell you, I've learned over time for comprehension, this is really helpful for some folks in the room. That auditory piece, feel free to follow along, read ahead, do what you need to do for you to understand it as best you can. And we're gonna start working through the exercise, and then you can see sort of what our plan is here to start working through it. All right, everybody good? No questions? I'm gonna jump in. I'm gonna use the podium for this bit. Is this on? Yes, look at us. All right. In 2040, a US-owned interstellar satellite discovered a planet that was hospitable to human life, Circe. Circe was not perfect, and a lot of terraforming and experimentation was necessary to make it habitable. But humans have been living there for the past 50 years, with multiple generations of children born on the planet. For building and food, humans used a combination of natural resources and the limited resources they were able to get from Earth with extreme expense. Generally, individuals from each country stayed in their traveler groups and formed communities around the planet. Though, after 50 years, people have moved about and cultures have grown. There was no indigenous intelligent species besides simple plants and animals. Near the coast of the main landmass on the planet lay a seaside town named Greca, and up the road is the picturesque mountain village known as Trill. Greca thrives on the bounty of the sea. Its people rely on an extremely vitamin-rich algae that grows in Circe's freshwater sea, which was used raw in many recipes. Trill draws its sustenance from the dry soils of the mountains, practicing agriculture and raising livestock native to the planet. They were small and quite similar to goats. For years, the people of Greca and Trill coexisted harmoniously, respecting each other's ways of life. Though the communities were distinct, some people traveled between the two quite frequently, as travel only took 3 hours. A farmer, Telpin, who owned the largest herd and farm in Trill, made a visit to Greca to buy supplies and visit friends there. Telpin brought back a case of the Greca algae. On a bad day, Telpin would admit he was jealous of the food and lifestyle in Greca. Though he loved his mountain views and the serene forests of Trill, the farmers struggled to grow much beyond dry grasses, and those crops were primarily only good for feeding their goats. This got him thinking, how could they use this algae in Trill? Telpin was an enterprising and curious sort, and after much trial and error, he determined that the algae, after some processing, made excellent fertilizer and was a natural pest repellent. With it, they could grow fields and fields of vegetables and other crops in the valleys near Trill. Meanwhile, back in Greca, Gina worked as an algae harvester. Every day, her crew went miles out to sea. Using finely meshed nets, they could pull in heaps and heaps of algae. At least they used to. Gina was part of a large harvesters collaborative, each with privately owned boats. On the average day, about 10 boats left Greca's shores to harvest algae. This was fine for many years, but in the past several months, they'd all been struggling to find algae blooms. They had to go further and further on each trip. Worse yet, they kept discovering massive groups of very small dead fish who they knew ate the algae. Gina privately worried that they were starving to death. Worried about panicking the community, most of the ship captains in the collaborative agreed to try and solve the problem privately. But rumors started spreading around Greca. Some, though not all, people started hoarding their algae, and it drove up the price, to the detriment of low-income community members. Gina was docking her boat one day when she saw Telpin shaking hands with another harvester and loading up hundreds of crates into a massive low-flying airliner. She asked around and learned this was actually Telpin's 5th purchase of a whole airliner of algae. She also learned that through Telpin's work, farmers in Trill had figured out how to process the algae and grow food. In the processing, the algae went a lot further and enabled Trill to grow 3 times the fruits and vegetables with just a small amount. She was pretty curious about that, but also furious. That algae was for the Grecans. The meals they used it in were sentimental to her, and a part of the new culture that they were fostering. Worried about algae supply, Gina, together with about half of the other harvesters, approached the ship captain who was selling algae to Telpin, requesting that the sales stop. Gina's group argued that the people of Greca needed the algae more. Without it, the city would be left without nutritious food, and the price was already going up and up as rumors of scarcity spread. They argued it was extremely irresponsible to sell the algae to some other community when they needed it so badly at home and it was so essential to their identity as Grecans. The seller wasn't totally sure he agreed, but he worried about his reputation among the other ships. He wrote to Telpin, telling him that their future deals were off. Furious, Telpin drafted a letter to the major news outlet in all of Circe, which sent news to communities all around the planet. In it, Telpin blasted the harvesters for their selfishness. He argued that just because Grecans lived near the algae, they had no specific right to it, and that hoarding the nutritious substance was to the detriment of not only Trill, but all of Circe. Gina and the harvesters tried to ignore this, but slowly interest from the other communities started coming in. Two inland communities, Zepia and Nustria, particularly expressed interest in deals to purchase algae. Gina felt compelled to respond. She sent the same news outlet a letter saying Telpin and Trill were the selfish ones. By taking the natural resources native to Greca for their own purposes, they were stealing and damaging the culture of Greca. The news outlet also shared her response with the whole planet. Now, everything's at a standstill. Rumors are flying that Trill is working with a different seaside city to purchase their own harvesting boats. Trill's supply of algae has run out, and they're back to using only resources related to their goats for meals or purchasing food from other places. The algae blooms haven't returned, and the harvesters are struggling to meet demand. Everyone is worried about food security worldwide, as rumors about the trouble of finding algae keep spreading. Communities are demanding that their governments ensure they have access not just to any food, but to nutritious food, full of vitamins and minerals. All right, so now you have an idea of what the scenario and the thorny problem we're looking at is. So you've split into your 10 groups. You each have your own unique interests and perspectives to this story. And I want you to put on the glasses of the group that you're in. There's 10 groups. There's 10 of you. You can see now if the facilitators want to show that. I just wanted you to read the story for the first time, not knowing what part you played in this. And I want to acknowledge that some of these are easier than others, right? Like if you were in group 3, the collaborative of harvesters, like I kind of gave you at least what Gina thinks. But I want to be clear. You are not Gina. You are not Trill, right? You are people in these communities. You are people coexisting on this planet and in these cultures. And that's often how we find ourselves in real world problems too, right? We're not necessarily always the instigator. We're not usually the decision maker, but we're a part of the community. And so I encourage you to get a little bit creative, right? Like if you are one of the plant scientists, you might be thinking, I have no idea. What is she talking about? But think about what is that group's interest, right? How would they approach these problems? How would they think that? You have facilitators in your group who are going to help you get creative if you all feel stuck and unsure of how to get started on these questions. I have given you questions in section 1 to look at and start thinking about. I'm going to give you about 10 or 15 minutes to roll through these, and then we will report out, and I'll talk about some more assessment tools that we might use, and then we'll do it all again. Questions for the whole group? All right, get talking. All right, we are going to report out on this. Now, again, in a classroom setting or with my clients, we would absolutely do this question by question and spend all of this time on all of it. We don't have time for that. So we're gonna narrow and we're gonna focus. But I would love to hear from each group, what is your group's biggest concern, issue, challenge? What is piquing your interest? What issue did you spot in this hypothetical that is of most interest to your group? And then there's a number one question you need answered. Now I'm going to spoil, we're not going to answer it, right? We're not going to have some wonderful back and forth with all of the other groups, but it's useful for you to hear what the other stakeholders in the room are wondering about, right? That is knowledge and information that you can use to make assessments. So I'm either just going to start here or unless there is a group who tells me that they're willing to talk first. Oh, look at that, nice.
Awesome. Okay, so we're saying like what are
What group you're in, and then those 2 questions.
okay. Okay, we are the news media. Our group is. Our group's greatest concern is telling the honest truth and the whole story, and also the ratings. We want to keep our ratings up, keep our viewership up, that kind of stuff. The greatest concern we were talking about is the algae's running out is really the base problem. Because if there was an abundance of algae, it wouldn't be affecting either society or the environment if there was enough algae for everybody. So that was our main headline, I guess, algae running out. And the main group we talked about wanting to talk more with is the plant scientist group to see if they could maybe talk about some research about why exactly the fish are dying. Like, is it the algae or is it the boat pollution? Is it something related to that? And also to see if they could research a way to regenerate the algae blooms to get the population up so that it could be more equitably distributed between everybody.
Thank you. I love that you brought up ratings, right? Like, we might be on Circe, but capitalism, live and well, right? Humans take stuff with us when we travel. Is your group ready? Can you talk? Awesome.
So we kind of followed like almost the same kind of path. So we talked a lot about algae, because clearly that is like the base problem here. And we also talked about kind of the issues with putting all of your stakes into algae. Like if all of your agriculture is based on like this fertilizer that's created by algae, like what happens if something happens to the algae later? So generally, like just I think talking to the plant sciences people and seeing like what other ways could we work with diversifying our agriculture and yeah, and not kind of putting everything into algae and seeing how we could get more algae like until we figure out diversification.
Which group are you? Group number 7.
Oh, we're number 7, which is the chefs and grocers.
My husband's a chef. I have a penchant for your group. All right, can we go here? Are you guys ready? Yes. I should stop asking that because I'm going to make you talk, even if you're not ready.
So we are trail farmers, and our biggest concern is how can we collaborate effectively and how can we address the socioeconomic and ecological, political situation and do a sustainable path forward in our farming practices.
Do you have any questions for another group? What's the biggest issue that you guys need to think about?
Diminishing resource. Diminishing resource.
Diminishing resources.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. Who's talking over here?
All right, so we are group 3. Yeah, the algae harvesters. Our main concern is the algae, the fish, and then if it bottles down to this, like a war. Our number one question would be ask the government, like what percentage of the algae needs to be traded, or if you can even like trade that at all. So yeah.
Great. I think the constant consideration of conflict is really critical, right? I mean, wars have been fought for a lot less. That's for sure. Is anyone ready to talk?
I have a lot of shy students here, so
That's just fine.
okay. We are group 6 for animal rights, and they said they're mostly concerned about the well-being of the fish and also the goats and the livestock, because they both need the algae apparently to thrive. And then the biggest questions, really, who owns the algae, or does anybody own it, and are there any regulations that should or are in place, should be put in place or are in place?
It's music to my ears. Let's make laws about stuff, right? That's my favorite thing to do. I'm a law professor. Let's regulate all the things. All right, who's talking over here? Thank you.
So we are the government of Greca, and we all talked about our main concern is ecosystem health. We also talked about maintaining partnerships with like surrounding communities, so like Trill, and also the happy and healthy community and growth, which I think by focusing on the ecosystem health, the other two will be benefiting as well. So yeah, I don't know if anyone else has anything else.
Great, thank you. All right, who do we have over here?
Okay, so we were group number 5, the combined leaders of Zepia and Nesturia. And our greatest concern was our access to algae, the cost of the algae, and any competition that would occur because of that. Um, our problems would have been limited diet or just kind of our approval ratings with our people, because we want to make sure if they want the algae, they have the algae. And then we didn't really get to the questions we have for other groups yet, but we just wanted to know how important the algae was to them and if they're willing to actually strike up a deal without having to become, with keeping the peace. We want to keep all the peace all the time.
You guys kind of got a challenge. Like, you have the least information about your entire culture, right? But I also think you're really interesting. And I will tell you, I put that in there because I do a lot of work in the nuclear area, right? And we think about the haves and the have-nots when we think about nuclear security. Who has stuff and who doesn't have stuff? And you're the have-nots right now. And that's a really interesting place to sit. And there's so many different ways that people have approached that from different countries. So we're not talking about nukes today, thank goodness. But you're the algae have-nots. And so it's a really interesting group. All right, somebody over here?
Yeah, so we are Group 9. We are a group of humanitarians, and our main concern is like food security, making sure there's like equal access to food and that everybody is having their basic needs met. And our biggest like problem is that obviously the algae is sort of the basis of the biggest food sources because Till is using it as like a fertilizer for their agriculture, and Greca is using it as their primary food source. So now that it's out, people are having issues, and now we have to try to pick up the slack and figure out how we're going to provide food for all of these places, because now it's not coming from Till, and we don't have it in Greca.
Thank you. All right, last group.
All right, so we are group 8. We are the team of plant scientists. Our greatest concern is also food security, specifically being able to provide food for the whole community, all the communities, while still preserving the planet and all the ecosystems. Our main problem to solve is protecting the algae while still diversifying and finding other ways of feeding the populations. The main question we wanted to ask was to the government of whoever, both. We wanted to know about like who owns the rights to the ocean, and if it's regulated, how can we protect the entire ocean, not just the piece that we're in charge of. Yeah.
That's fantastic. More regulation. I love it, right? Everyone always wants to ask me who owns space, who owns the ocean. I'm not going to tell you.
Our group was the government of Trill, and our main concerns were food security and then the economic implications associated with the algae industry, and then also the strain on planetarian relationships. We thought that was a significant aspect as well. And then we define the issue as retaining food prosperity while still preserving the entire algae supply. And our proposed solution was forming government coalitions in shared algae harvesting. And then our question was, would Greca be willing to establish economical relationships with Trill?
There is no way you could have meant to do this, but that's an excellent segue, right? So one of the things that we're going to talk about really briefly that might help you with the second half of this exercise is just one of the mechanisms that we sometimes use to make assessments. So DIME-FIL, which is an acronym, as you might imagine, is just one example of some of the methodologies that political scientists use to assess actors and behavior. So in the military context, we might take a country, and we're going to go through some of these things, and I'll leave the slide up for you while you work through the second half here. But diplomatic, this is easy when we're talking about a country, right? We can look at what is the diplomatic attaché, how do they fit into international relations, but you can still sort of look at diplomacy as political capability of any group, right? So say you're talking about the school you go to. What is the political capital of your principal in the school district system? It's an assessment you might make when you're trying to get something passed or looking at something that you want to happen in the school board, right? So you can still look at diplomacy outside of the international law context and instead look at it as your politicking, right? How does this actor do that? Are they good at it? And what kind of capital do they have? Information. What do they know? What do they not know? How good they are at sharing it? Do we think that we have the right information about them, right? This is a lot about transparency. And again, in the political science field, we might take this down and we're going to actually code it and mark it up. So we might go through a profile of a country and we'd actually code this and turn it into statistics to give us some helpful data. But this is also an interesting qualitative exercise, right? To just think about it as information. Their military capabilities, economic capabilities, their financial, what kind of cash on hand here, right? Being oil rich is different than being cash on hand rich, right? So thinking about the differences here between what is their economic capabilities and their immediate financial capabilities. What sort of intelligence community do they have? Have they gathered intel on us? Do we have intel on them, right? You can put that out of the state context too and think about that in lots of other ways. What do people know about each other? And then of course my favorite, which is law, right? Do they follow the law? How do they apply the law? Does the law apply evenly there, right? So lots of questions that you think about. And so when we think about actors, we can use dime fill as a really systematic way to think about how they're going to behave. And when we look at the totality of those things, if you've coded it, you might actually get some sort of numerical answer to help you predict how they might behave. If you don't code it, and you're just doing it qualitatively, it's still going to give you a lot of variables to roll through your mind to think about how you're going to predict the behavior of other groups so that you can make some choices about what to do to advance your cause for your group, right? Because they're all really interconnected. So you'll see on the back page, we have section 2. Now, you don't have to use dime fill if this doesn't make sense to you or you think this is too big of a stretch for your group. I encourage you to at least think of a few of these factors. But think about how your group makes decisions. How do plant scientists decide what to do, right? What kind of impact do they have on the culture? And if they want to have a bigger impact, how do they do that, right? How could they influence one of these? If you figure out, for example, that your group really needs to influence the government of Greca, then you need to think through the dime fill for the government of Greca, right? How am I going to influence that person with this set of variables? And then we're going to start thinking about solutions, right? And I want this part's hard for people. Think about solutions from the perspective of your group. Don't try and solve the problem because there are some pretty obvious things that these people could all get together and do to make everyone's lives better, right? Whether or not those things will happen, who knows? We'll talk about that at the very, very end, right? So at this point, we're still not objective viewers yet. We're still in the viewpoint of the group that we're representing. So put on those glasses and think about what solutions do you see from your group's perspective, and then the argument piece. Now, in a classroom setting, I would have you make 1 or 2 arguments, and then I'd have the other groups counter them, and then we'd go back and do what is your best argument to that counter. We're not going to do that. But you can start to think through, when I say argument, that's what I mean. How are you going to argue that this solution is the best solution to making everybody on this planet happy, but more importantly, that your group gets what your group wants, or what is most in your interest, and solves your biggest issue that you just identified? Sound good? All right, go forth. Doing my best to get us back to only be 5 minutes off on the agenda. So we're going to get started again. I'm sorry to do it to you. I'm a taskmaster. All right. We are going to try and do some really quick report outs. So what I want to hear is, what is a solution that your group talked about? Right? This can be quick. This can be simple. What is a solution your group talked about?
My group talked about like algae sharing programs as well as algae conservation, which basically means that only a certain amount of algae can be taken from the ocean at a certain amount of time. And then there would be also a trade coalition ensuring that the harvesters in Greca still get some of the algae, but then they can trade for some farming products from Trill for algae.
Awesome. I mean, that would all solve the problem.
Yeah, so our solution was pretty much trying to present almost kind of like a 60 Minutes type of thing, where we give each of the, give each of the vested stakeholders a chance to kind of voice where they're coming from, and then maybe at the end of presumably like an episode, we would take some time to just talk about what it is that we found and maybe dispel any misinformation or expand on any information that was presented during that time.
And that's a good question, right? Does social media exist on Circe yet? Did we bring it with us? God, let's hope not. Here you go.
We had two solutions. One of them was mass producing algae, and then the other one was like experimenting with other foods and seeing like if we could use the goats instead or like the fish.
When in doubt, more research. Getting my steps in. All right, here we go. Coming to you. Want to go again?
Or somebody else. Okay.
Right?
Are these ones? So our envisioned solutions are economic redevelopment, declaring this a state of emergency for the city or the nation of Trill, and investing in alternative solutions to the algae.
Right, how do you make synthetic algae? I don't know. That could be cool. Probably shouldn't say that for the algae harvesters.
Okay, yeah. So so right now we're like algae harvesters, and like harvesters like they only take. So we're gonna like go back to farming it. So farmers like grow the algae and not just harvest it. So like a way that we can like keep the algae like reproducing it.
Right. Yeah. Change it from sort of almost a consumption model or just a collection model to a sustainable growth. Yeah, sustainable farming.
Our solution would be talking to like the plant scientists and seeing if we can grow more algae, and if not, like putting restrictions on the algae.
You got to share it. Not everybody gets it all the time. Who's gonna do it?
Our solutions that we were looking at were we would want to put laws in place that would make the algae harvest sustainable and like make sure that the culture of Greca is still being prioritized since the algae was important to it. And then we also wanted to meet with plant scientists regularly so we understand if the algae is happy and healthy. And then we also wanted to establish a healthy trade between like all the different countries on Circe.
I'll do a quick plug. The University of Nebraska has an excellent international trade program.
Some of the solutions we thought of was like having more like research and development with the plant scientists and like just see is there a way to get the algae to grow in more places or more productively. And also, since we were kind of the two rando towns, like, do they even need it, or is like the status quo work for them before they even started worrying about the algae?
Yeah, you did not mention goat manure, but that was talked about.
Oh, goat manure was also on the table. It's a fair point. Who's talking? It's my favorite part. I walk up and everyone just stares at me blankly. I can do it. Okay, thank you.
So we kind of talked about how as humanitarians, we don't necessarily have like a lot of power to like create laws or anything like that, but we can sort of advocate for certain laws that would promote like sustainable harvesting and like reproduction of the algae populations. But in the meantime, our main focus is food security, so we could look for donations and if there are any like grants or things like that available that we could take advantage of to try to support people through this time.
Great. All right. Last group. Here we go. Our plant scientists.
Yes, we are the plant scientists. So our solution sort of connects to all your guys' solutions. We want to research the algae. We want to see what it needs to thrive. We want to see how it affects the fish populations, what makes it a good fertilizer, and also work to develop other options besides algae. We think that most of the stakeholders would support us, minus the harvesters possibly, if we aren't able to work a way where they can still harvest what they need. And then there's also ways, like based off of our research, if it goes the wrong way, there are stakeholders that will be mad at us limiting the amount of algae they're able to harvest. And our argument is that we're able to provide answers and resources to all of the stakeholders. So yeah, we should just let us do our research and we'll tell you what you need to know.
Objective science, right? I think we can all applaud that. So that's really interesting, right? So one of the groups that you were worried about were the harvesters, but the harvesters decided, no, we're going to pivot and we're going to be sustainable algae farmers, right? And that's the information that changes all the time, right? So when you're making these decisions, thinking through how people are going to behave and act. Now, if we had more time, of course, you could have spent more time with the other groups, thinking through what you would have done and collecting more of that information and making those assessments. But hopefully this was a little bit of a glimmer into what these types of exercises can do when it comes to problem solving and when it comes to thinking through how to solve really complex problems, or at the very least, work collaboratively. So again, I'm not going to have us do this piece because I'm trying to get us back on track. But generally, I would ask you to reflect on your own as an objective observer, right? So now you're no longer a humanitarian or a plant scientist or a mayor or whatever. You can go back and say, here's some solutions, right? And there were some solutions all over this problem, right? You can use the algae when processed to grow fields and fields of vegetables, right? You can use a little to go a really long way. The problem is the people, right? And sometimes with a lot of the issues that we face that are environmental or about sustainability, that's the analogy. I tell my students this working on the space stuff all the time. A lot of the technology for a lot of the stuff we want to do in space, cleaning up space debris, all of that, it actually exists. We know how to do some of that. We can't diplomatically get it done because the people can't agree how to do it. And those are the problems the lawyers solve, right? And you don't have to be a lawyer to solve problems that way. But I think we need to spend more time thinking about the people problem, because our engineers and our researchers and our plant scientists, they have our back. They know the science sometimes, but we haven't always worked out that people problem. And I think exercises like this help us move that needle forward into figuring out how to find collaborative solutions and assess how other people in the situation are going to behave so that we can meet them where they are to try and find some solutions. So my takeaway, again, I would love to have a conversation with this, and anyone who wants to talk afterwards, I welcome that. But here's the questions I would ask you to ask yourself after you've thought about this exercise and as an objective observer, right? Could you use a structure like this to approach another problem that you've been thinking about, that you're writing a paper on, right? Some project you need to do is for senior year, I don't know. The field you're interested in, what are you thinking you want to study? Could you use this there? How does that work there? What big thorny problems are they dealing with that you want to think about? And if you never have, I really encourage you to sit down and write a narrative like this about a problem that keeps you up at night. One of those things you've been thinking about. I promise that will actually make you feel better, not worse. You can even just ask ChatGPT to get you started. If you're not a fictional writer, that's fine. Take it, have fun. Right? It's meant to be a fun exercise to help you think through some of this and to put yourself in the shoes of somebody else who might be on a different side of the problem. I hope this was useful. I hope you got something out of it. I look forward to talking to folks afterwards. Thank you.